Hello and welcome everyone. I am Ralph Rivas, Rappler's business reporter. Ngayon ay pag-uusapan pa rin natin ang epekto ng novel coronavirus sa businesses, especially small and medium enterprises. Alam naman natin na yung mga SMEs talaga, ito yung backbone ng ating ekonomiya and employs millions and millions of Filipinos. And they are among the most affected because of this pandemic, because of the lockdown. Now, to help guide MSMEs, owners, save off bankruptcy through sound financial management. Project Lifeline is doing this webinar. Now, joining us to help us make sense of what is happening and what are the available options and how businesses can cope with this pandemic. We have Vincent Rapisura of SEDPI Group of Enterprises and Attorney Aldrich Fitzroy of Mossbelt Law Offices. Thanks so much for joining us. Now, I understand Vince is kicking this webinar off. So take it away, Vince.
Good day to everyone, and thank you for inviting me for this webinar on how to make a financial rehabilitation work for business owners. So let me introduce to you our a group of social enterprises. We are composed of 6 organizations. So we are into training, research, consulting, financing, real estate, publications, rural banking, and we also have a Singapore office. And all of these businesses are focused on micro enterprises and domestic workers, construction workers, particularly for the overseas Filipino workers working abroad. We call ourselves social enterprises because we have 2 bottom lines, and that is primarily social and economic empowerment for Filipinos. Okay, so we've trained about, so the group, SEDPI actually stands for Social Enterprise Development Partnerships Incorporated, and we provide capacity building services in the fields of microfinance, social entrepreneurship, financial literacy, pro-poor market development, disaster and climate change, and gender development. So over the years, we have trained about 50,000 micro-enterprises in the Philippines and consulting to about 7,000 socially organizations worldwide, and financial literacy trainings to some 25,000 Filipino migrants in 27 countries. So SEDPI currently implements a social microfinance program, and we conduct rapid community assessments on the impact of COVID-19 to micro-enterprises and the informal sector. This is a series of weekly surveys that started last April 6th with almost 5,000 respondents each round. And we had our last update last March 22. The current one is currently ongoing. So all respondents of this research are SEDPI members who access financial services such as loans, savings, insurance, as well as financial literacy trainings. 95% of our members are women who have collateral-free loans up to 20,000 pesos, payable in 6 months to finance their livelihoods, such as sari-sari stores, karinderya, farmers, fisher folks, dressmaking, and vending. The loans bear an interest rate of 3.33% per month, which is comparable to credit cards' interest rates. Most of the women are married in households that have more than 5 household members and greater than 3 children. More than half of them are women who are the main breadwinners of their household. And 2 out of 3 women have husbands who also have source of income. So understandably, the research is not representative of the entire Philippines. It is highly localized, but should be a good case study that reflects the situation in the countryside, particularly in Agusan del Sur and Surigao del Sur in Mindanao, where we operate. SEDPI believes that the nationwide experience may not be far from our research results. So let me talk about the coping mechanisms of the micro-enterprises during this time of COVID-19. 12% of them sold their assets at a loss. 47%, 45, and 53. So about 5% of the micro-enterprises access loans, access help from the community, and use their savings. No, what's a good thing here is about 69% of our micro-enterprises said that they have enough coverage in terms of insurance to cover hospitalization and death in case they get affected by COVID-19. And this is explained because the high percentage, because all of them are most of them are our microfinance clients who are able to access micro insurance. And 88% are able to access government assistance such as relief goods and the cash assistance from the government. What we want to happen here is that we want to really reduce the distress selling of assets and accessing of loans, because these are not sustainable ways of coping in times of disasters. And what we want to emphasize is really to promote more savings mobilization, to be more self-reliant, and to get protection against disasters and calamities. Okay. We also took a look at the demand of micro-enterprise products and services. And what we found out is from May 15 to May 22, we've seen an uptick of those micro-enterprises that experience zero sales. So that means they're closed their shops. And this has been almost a tripling, no, of this in the previous weeks. In this graph, you'll see the trend line for the weaker demand. And with this one, the green graph shows you a bit of an uptick on the micro enterprises that experienced strong demand from 13% to 21% last week. So that is on a bright side. So if you'll see the 57%, the 78% to 57% drop on the weakening of the demand, either those were transferred to a stronger demand or they stopped their business altogether. The supply for micro-enterprise products and services, in the past weeks, it has been consistent that they're able to sustainably to get a steady source of their supply for their micro-enterprise operations. But this dipped to 64% last week. Conversely, the ones who were not able to get supply went up last week. Okay, so just to be more interactive in this presentation, can you comment same in our comment section if you observe the same phenomenon in your community, whether you observe this slump in demand and also the difficulty in supply for micro enterprises to operate, so that we have a sense of your community also. Okay, for the micro enterprises assistance that they were able to receive from the government, what's a good thing here is almost all of them have already received some form of relief goods from the government. But when we asked them how effective or how sufficient these relief goods are, they said that this is only enough for 1 to 3 days, and they started to receive this only once or twice during start of the lockdown. And the cash assistance is also has also increased. In the first 2 weeks, it's only about 10 to 11% who were able to get cash assistance from the government, and 78% were able to receive this in the last week, no? As of last week, which is a good indicator that the government is at least responding to the needs of the micro enterprises. We also asked our members, since they have existing loans from our microfinance institution, we asked them what do they want to do with their loan after the pandemic? Will they be able to pay it the normal way? Will they be able to will they be asking for restructuring and restructuring plus refinancing? And to our surprise, most of them actually want normal financing of their loans to resume. And we think this is because of two main things. So one is we offer short-term loans to them, and if they're able to resume the payment of their loans, these are relatively short-term loans. They finish it and they can re-avail of the money again. And another reason for this is perhaps the cash assistance that they were able to get from the government was able to help them survive and fend for their daily expenses, and so they have enough capital to be used for their micro enterprise. But still, a significant number, or 30%, are going to request for restructuring, which will, of course, have a hit in terms of our cash flow position as a financial intermediary. And then those who want to restructure and at the same time access refinancing, this one decreased to 4% from a high of 23% over the past weeks. Okay. So let me ask you a question for those who joined us in our webinar. In how many months do you think microenterprises will recover? This is a very important question that we asked our microenterprises, because we want also to gauge how long we are supposed to give the grace periods in terms of our loan collections, and at the same time also it will send us a sense of how long we will be able to regain back our regular cash flow and resume normal operations. So when we ask this question to them, actually it's very encouraging, no? In April 30, none of them said that in 1 month they would be able to bounce back. But as of May 15, 19% said that they would be able to bounce back from the pandemic. And then it's pretty steady for those who answered within 1 to 2 months that they would be able to bounce back from the pandemic as soon as the lockdowns are lifted. And we have 3 to 4 months, about 25% in May 15, and we have 4%, a few who said that they would recover in 5 to 6 months. So the longest time to recover is about 6 months. And we were quite surprised when we saw this. And when we talked to our primary stakeholders, what we learned is because they are micro enterprises, they need small capital, and they only need a few pesos to bounce back. And if you talk about bouncing back at this level, they're really talking about bouncing back to a level that they could be able to earn a living for day to day. So in Filipino, we call this isang kahig, isang tuka. So the bouncing back is not really very far. So I think that's the main reason why they're saying that, okay, within 6 months, at the latest, we will bounce back. But most of them said that within 1 to 2 months, they would be able to bounce back. Another reason for that also is that the complexity of operating micro enterprises. Like if you say you're going to operate like ambulant vending or a sari-sari store, the entry barrier for those kinds of businesses is very low, and that's why it's easy to bounce back. It's going to be more difficult for small and medium enterprises. We also asked them the assistance needed after the lockdown, and you'll see here that those who are needing relief, who would need relief goods, have practically gone down to zero, and those who are looking for work would be about 15%, and most are actually requesting for cash assistance after the lockdown. So there's a high demand for getting cash instead of goods to be able to bounce back. So to summarize the findings, so microfinance clients have savings, have insurance. They experience muted sales because the demand expectation failed to transpire. The supply source, we think, is not much of a problem. It's really more a demand problem. Most prefer to resume normal payments, but with 2 weeks to 1 month grace period after lockdown, less need for refinancing, and there's a hopeful, positive, fast recovery among them. Majority said that it's going to happen within 2 months, and they need cash assistance after the lockdown. So for the financial behavior of micro enterprises, what do you think would be the more important for low-income groups, loans or savings? So I hope you'll be commenting your answer so we can review that later. So we asked our members when would they be able to resume their weekly payments, and most of them said that they would be able to pay next week. So that's about 18%. And when we checked the actual performance from 18%, the actual for those who paid is actually 13%. So there's a variation of about 5%. And we also asked them, will you be able to save? Will you already be able to save? And 65% said that yes, they would be able to save already. last May 8th. And during that week, when we checked our performance, 20% have started to save. So there's a big discrepancy in terms of their estimate whether they would be able to save or not. But a good finding here is that we found out that micro enterprises would be willing to save if the financial products are there, if they fit their preferential, if the financial product fits their preferences in terms of liquidity and availability of the funds more than the loans. We also asked them for the capital, and as you can see here, the amount would be about 3,000 to 9,000 pesos to restart their micro enterprise operations. So in terms of financial access, most members of our members have loans up from 5,000 to 20,000 pesos. But to restart, they only need about half of that, which is 3,000 to 9,000. There are also members of other microfinance institutions, and we think that there should be some form of informal syndication of loans from the industry to be able to spread the risk. Okay. So what are our rebuilding strategies? So our rebuilding strategies are fivefold. No? So this is cost plus, capital and 0% loans, social safety nets, access to government welfare programs, financial inclusion and financial literacy, and mobilizing social investments. So for us, we will convert all existing loan agreement with members to joint ventures. So loans that will be restructured into joint venture counterparts that will bear 0% interest. Those needing refinancing will be charged with a service fee instead of interest. And instead of focusing on cash as the asset, labor and participation is given more importance, which is a departure from traditional capitalism. Our system is actually more mimicking that of the ethical Islamic finance, which even the Pope said would really solve the global financial crisis. Second, aside from providing capital to our members, we will also continue providing financial literacy trainings to them. Members contribute their labor and day-to-day operations to the joint venture, and after paying the service fee, micro enterprises get to keep all the profits of the micro enterprise. So this is our method for profit and sharing and risk sharing scheme. So we are departing from the interest-based, debt-driven development to a more solidarity financing, which is profit sharing and risk sharing. So third, we will convert our members from being mere borrowers to become true partners in this development. Okay. So pivoting to the recovery and the better normal. So these are our recommendations for the government to support micro enterprise development. The first one is response and mitigation. So we really would like to reiterate and emphasize the importance of mass testing, especially on the micro enterprise level and the informal sector, because they are the most vulnerable groups. We also want to improve contact tracing and isolation, and of course, increasing the healthcare capacity of our hospitals. Cash assistance to jumpstart the local economy. Financial inclusion, and 0% calamity loans for SSS, Pag-IBIG, and GSIS. We took a look at the policy of the calamity loans of SSS and Pag-IBIG, and we found out that members are actually drawing from a percentage of what they have contributed already in SSS and Pag-IBIG. So since it's the contribution of the members, we think that this should be zero rated, especially now in the time of pandemic. And of course, enabling fiscal and monetary policies. So financing for MSMEs, we have seen that there are 0% interest loans, which is actually called mudaraba, no? in Islamic banking. So these are financing agreements that have profit and loss sharing schemes. Land Bank and DBP is preparing 0% interest loans to finance 50% of the direct labor cost of MSMEs. DOT has 43 billion interest-free loans for primary tourism enterprises, which could also be SMEs. And the BOI is preparing 66 billion interest-free loans for import-export enterprises. So for MSMEs, these are my suggestions, our suggestions. So use the time to prepare the pertinent documents so that when you negotiate with the creditors or your investors, you have documents to show them. Of course, paramount to that is preparing your cash flow projections. You can also use the time during the lockdown to retool and reskill your human resources. And then discover marketing channels, specifically the delivery of products and services, and going online to be able to sell your products and services. And of course, do not forget your personal finance. So that ends my presentation. Our contact details are flashed in your screens right now. And if you want to get in touch with us and have questions, of course, you are most welcome to do so. So Ralph?
Yeah, thanks so much for your presentation. Alam mo, marami na akong tanong dyan eh. Your survey was very interesting, no? But I'll hold on to my questions, and let's listen to what Attorney Aldrich D has to say about microfinance and the legal perspective pertaining to small businesses. Hi, sir. Good afternoon.
Hi, good afternoon, Ralph. Thank you. Good afternoon to everyone. So I'll be presenting the legal aspects on what you can do when you're experiencing financial distress. So under our laws, we have the Financial Rehabilitation and Insolvency Act. Now, this law applies to provides for the remedies for insolvent debtors. So the first question is, how does the law define insolvent debtors? It's a financial condition of a debtor who is generally unable to pay his debts as they fall due in the ordinary course of business, or he has liabilities that are greater than his assets. So in that case, if you are an insolvent debtor, you have several remedies under the Financial Rehabilitation and Insolvency Act, or the FRIA. And what are the available remedies? Now, the first would be suspension of payments. Then the second would be rehabilitation. And then the last would be liquidation. So we'll take them one by one in this presentation. When you talk of suspension of payments, this applies to individuals. They don't apply to partnerships, associations, or corporations. For you to avail of the suspension of payments, as an individual debtor, you have to show that you possess sufficient property to cover all debts, but you foresee an impossibility of meeting the debts when they respectively fall due. So it means that you have a liquidity problem or a cash flow problem, and you'll just need time, additional time before you can repay all of your debts. In that case, you can file a petition with the courts and ask the courts to allow you to grant you to declare you in a state of suspension of payments. What usually happens is you would provide a proposal to all of your creditors, and if they as to how you plan to pay your debts, and if they agree, then that will be approved by the court, and that will be implemented to everyone. Now, the second remedy that you have would be rehabilitation. Now, this is not just limited to sole proprietorships. It also extends to partnerships and corporations. And the goal or the purpose of a rehabilitation is really to restore the debtor to a condition of successful operation and solvency. And to be able to do that, to be able to convince the court that you can be restored in such a state, you have to show that your continued operation is economically feasible, and the creditors can recover by way of present value payments presented in the plan more if the debtor continues as an going concern than if it is immediately liquidated. This means that they'll get more if you undergo rehabilitation versus if they just liquidate the debtor's assets after the petition is filed. So you have to show that in order to convince the court to declare you to be rehabilitated. I'd like to emphasize that the law uses present value payments, and this is crucial because in rehabilitation, what usually happens is the creditors don't get their money right away. Usually the payment is deferred. And to ensure or to entice them to agree to and to protect them, the law requires that they should be paid with their present, we should ensure present value recovery. And this takes into account the interest that the amount of money that would have earned if the creditor were paid on time. And this is something that rehabilitation courts must look into, that they have to ensure that the projected cash flow from a business rehabilitation plan allows for the closest present value recovery for its creditors. Otherwise, if it doesn't, and if the creditors think that liquidation is a more viable option, then they would rather liquidate the business than opt for rehabilitation. Now, why do we have this remedy? Because the state values rehabilitation rather than liquidation. It values more. It values if a business enterprise is allowed to continue, where its assets are being used to generate revenue and support the economy. For this reason, the objective of a rehabilitation is to restore and reinstate the corporation or the partnership or the sole proprietorship to its former position of successful operation and solvency. Allows the debtor to have a new lease on life, a fresh start. And at the same time, rehabilitation is not just there to protect the debtors, it's also there to protect the creditors. That's why it's also the objective of rehabilitation to allow the creditors to be paid their claims out of its earnings. Again, we go back to the concept of present state recovery, present value recovery. And what happens when a company undergoes rehabilitation? So enforcement of claims against the debtors are generally suspended. What takes place is a rehabilitation plan, which I will discuss later. And the rehabilitation plan is binding not only on the debtor, but also on all creditors, regardless of whether they participated or did not participate in the court proceedings, whether they approve or they oppose the rehabilitation plan. For as long as the rehabilitation plan is approved by the court, that's binding on all creditors. And to help the debtors, usually national and local taxes are waived until approval of the rehabilitation plan or the termination of the rehabilitation proceedings. So what's a rehabilitation plan? So this is one of the crucial aspects when you go into rehabilitation. Before the court will approve, will declare you to be, will approve the petition and allow a company or a sole proprietorship to undergo rehabilitation, it has to look into whether what's provided for in the rehabilitation plan is feasible or not. So the rehabilitation plan is sort of like your roadmap. It shows your game plan on how you're going to restore the financial well-being and viability of the insolvent debtor. And the law enumerates how some of the means by which you can do that. For example, it can provide for debt forgiveness, debt rescheduling, reorganization, or quasi-reorganization, to name a few. But those are not the only exclusive methods. The rehabilitation plan can provide for other additional methods to achieve rehabilitation. So again, as I mentioned earlier, before a court will grant and declare a company to be under rehabilitation, you need to submit an economically feasible rehabilitation plan. So how do we know if a rehabilitation plan is feasible or not? So you have to show that the debtor has assets that can generate more cash if used in its daily operations than if sold. You have to show that the liquidity issues can be addressed by a practical business plan that will generate enough cash to sustain daily operations. And lastly, you have to show that the debtor has a definite source of financing for the proper and full implementation of a rehabilitation plan that is anchored on realistic assumptions and goals. So these were the parameters used by the Supreme Court, and these were lifted from the teachings of a UP Law professor, Professor Gomez. The emphasis, in order to determine feasibility of a rehabilitation plan, there has to be an emphasis on liquidity, on being able to meet your cash flow problems. So even though you may have more, so the Supreme Court in one case said that a corporate's assets may be more than its current liabilities, but some assets may be in the form of land or capital equipment. So this presents a problem in your liquidity, in liquidity, because you cannot easily sell these assets. So rehabilitation sees to it that these assets are used in a economic manner, such that they will generate more value if used efficiently rather than if they are liquidated. And how do you know if a rehabilitation plan is not feasible? So the Supreme Court mentioned in the same case, Viva Shipping Lines mentioned some of the parameters to determine when a rehabilitation plan is not feasible. So one of which is there's no sound and workable business plan, or the rehabilitation plan provides baseless and unexplained assumptions, targets, and goals. For example, you present a financial statement, but it's unaudited, and you do not provide for notes or the figures or explanation on where you got the figures. The third is speculative capital infusion or complete lack thereof for the execution of the business plan. For example, your proposal is you get additional capital from a sister company, but there's no showing that the sister company has approved to provide to sell its assets and provide you with capital infusion. Another is cash flow cannot sustain daily operations. And then last is negative net worth and the assets are near full depreciation or fully depreciated. So for example, if the assets consist of vessels and these are not serviceable, the Supreme Court in Viva Shipping Line said that, well, you cannot be, it's not, your rehabilitation plan is not feasible because you can't use your assets to generate income, to generate revenue, to generate cash. So what are the different methods of doing rehabilitation? So we have the court-supervised rehabilitation. These are divided into two types, voluntary and involuntary. When we say voluntary, this means that it is filed by the debtor himself, the owner, by the majority of the partners, or with the approval, or if it's a corporation, by majority vote of the board of directors and authorized by its 2/3 of its stockholders. On the other hand, you also have involuntary rehabilitation, and this is usually filed by the creditors or the group creditors, and they represent claims amounting to at least 1 million pesos or at least 25% of the subscribed capital stock or partners' contributions, whichever is higher. So those are now those are the difference between voluntary and involuntary. It really depends on who is the one filing the petition. The third is pre-negotiated rehabilitation. So this means that the debtor went to the creditors and entered into negotiations for a possible rehabilitation. And once they come into an agreement, they submit it to the court for its approval and for its implementation. And then the last would be the out-of-court or informal restructuring agreements and rehabilitation plans. So this is just the same as the pre-negotiated rehabilitation. The key difference here is the debtor and a majority of the creditors enter into an agreement for the rehabilitation of the company, and they don't necessarily submit the rehabilitation plan to the court. So they implement it on their own. And if they have problems in implementing the rehabilitation plan, usually the rules provide that they can seek the assistance of court in implementing the plan. So that covers rehabilitation. Now, what happens if rehabilitation is no longer feasible, or in which case the rehabilitation can be converted into liquidation proceedings. So liquidation proceedings occurs when the court comes in and liquidates all of the assets of the individual, the partnership, or the corporation. It can be through voluntary, wherein it is filed by the insolvent debtor, or involuntary, wherein it is filed by the creditors. And as I mentioned earlier, a rehabilitation proceeding can also be converted into a liquidation proceeding in certain instances, such as when the rehabilitation court finds that the debtor is insolvent and there's no likelihood for the debtor to be rehabilitated. For example, if the projected cash flow presented in the rehab plan is unrealistic, then the better option would be for the court to convert the proceedings into liquidation to protect the creditors. The second instance is when the rehabilitation plan is not confirmed by the rehabilitation court within 1 year from the filing of the petition, or the rehabilitation proceedings is terminated because of failure of rehabilitation or dismissal for reasons other than technical grounds. Likewise, also, even though a rehabilitation plan may have been approved by the court, if during the course of the proceedings it's found out that the rehabilitation plan is no longer feasible given the circumstances, then the creditor can simply move and convert the proceedings into liquidation. So that ends my presentation, Ralph. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Attorney Aldrich D. Now, saan na si Vincent? Kasama na natin siya dito sa discussion. Yan. For those that have just been tuning in, we're conducting this webinar to help small businesses cope with this pandemic. Pinag-usapan natin kanina yung survey based dun sa organization ni Vincent, yung SEDPI Group of Enterprises. Now, babalikan ko yun, no? Parang Vincent, now you discussed earlier yung optimism ng small businesses, correct? So,
Right.
What are these businesses ba that feel that they can bounce back the soonest? Anong klaseng negosyo to?
Right. So yung yung isa sa konteksto ko lang. So where the research was done is in the rural areas. And we think na panalo talaga yung rural development in this pandemic kasi yung physical distancing and social distancing doon mas madaling i-implement. And we also believe that the agriculture sector will be this will be our saving grace in this pandemic. So marami talagang magbe-benefit na mga micro enterprises involved in the agricultural sector who will be able to bounce back. So isa nakita namin in our operations yung mga nakakabalik kaagad, ito yung mga nagtitinda ng mga essential goods, so mga pagkain, mga sabon and all of these things. Sila yung makakapag-bounce back ng mas mabilis. And we also think that those who are producers of agricultural products, sila yung makakapag-bounce back ng mas mabilis talaga. So yung mas nahihirapan...
Yeah, you also mentioned those that have sold assets. So anong mga types of businesses ba to?
Well, really, ito yung mga businesses, yung mga binibenta nilang mga ari-arian, usually ay lupa na they're forced to sell because they no longer have funds para tustusan yung kanilang pang-araw-araw ng pangangailangan. May mga nagbebenta din ng kanilang appliances, ng kanilang motorsiklo, ng tricycle na pangkabuhayan dati. So ito yung kanilang ginagawa. I think yung level kasi that we've done in terms of our research, hindi ito yung mga formally registered enterprises that would really undergo bankruptcy proceedings or rehabilitation proceedings. So mas madali sa kanila na magbenta na lang.
So Attorney D, ano bang options for these ganito ka micro businesses for on the legal side para medyo maiwasan naman mga yung mga ganitong issue na kailangan na magbenta? Are there saan sila pwede lumapit?
Well, their options is really to, well, they can negotiate with their creditors. Kausapin nila. Maybe they can ask for a restructuring or a reschedule of the payments. Because I'm sure for creditors, they would also be interested in ensuring that their businesses, these very micro enterprises, continue their businesses. Because if you, I mean, if you're going to be very ruthless and you're going to try to claim all of their assets, it might not be enough. But if you allow them to operate, I mean, just allow them to operate, wait for a bit before you get paid. I think that's a more feasible solution because you're ensured that you get something. And at the same time, you're also helping the economy. You're also helping these micro enterprises thrive. And that also translates into a return in your business because after they repay, if they also need money, they can go back to the same creditors and ask for an additional loan.
Yeah, I actually agree with Attorney Aldrich with that because based on our experience, yun nga if you kill the goose that lay egg for your business, then you're patay ka na rin. So sa amin is we continually talk to our clients tapos titignan namin kung talaga bang realistic pa yung kanilang hinihingi and tama na give them the leeway, the breathing room to be able to recover because if they recover, the business will also recover. The financial institutions will also recover. If you liquidate, tama yung sabi ni attorney, chances are below the present value yung makukuha mo. Hindi mo mababawi lahat yung na-expose mo na funds sa kanila. So in our case, we're going at the extra mile, and what we've done is to really stop charging interest because if we continue to charge interest at this point, talagang mas pabigat 'yon sa kanila. So what we are doing now is to enter into a joint venture with them instead, to share the risk and the losses. Dito kami nanggagaling For example, ang mga farmers, sila ang nagpapakain sa buong bansa. Pero sila yung mangungutang, magkakaroon ng bagyo, lindol, ngayon pandemic, sila ang they will shoulder all the cost of these external disasters. But the irony is, sila yung nagpapakain sa atin. So instead of having them bear all the risk, our social enterprise is coming up with a movement that we share the risk with them because that is the right thing to do and that is the way forward to bring progress at the grassroots level.
Yeah, medyo masalimuot yung issue na yan pagdating sa agriculture sector kasi I mean for one, banks would, di ba, agrano pa lang medyo ayaw magpautang ng bangko. They'd rather pay penalties. But that's a completely different issue. But you mentioned also earlier about preparing cash flow projections. So can you elaborate more on that now to help these small businesses?
Yeah. Well, in terms of doing planning, yung cash flow projections kasi nakatali yan sa sinasabi ni attorney kanina pa niya sinasabi na you have to prepare a rehabilitation plan or your business plan, Nakatali yan parate. And my mantra on that, and this is what I teach in Ateneo where I teach my students social entrepreneurship. People first, then money, then things. So when you do your cash flow projections, pag-isipan mo muna ang kapakanan mo bilang tao, ikaw, yung mga kasamahan mo, pagkatapos yung pera, and that would be your creditors, and your investors, and then things, that would be your business, your business dealings. So yun yung tinitignan namin in terms of prioritizing because eventually at the end of the day, what you will really have to do is to preserve yourself and for you to be able to survive this pandemic.
Now, attorney, nagbanggit ka rin kanina regarding dun sa liquidation at saka sa rehabilitation. Ano bang sa experience mo, attorney, ano bang hinahanap ng mga creditors to prove that a company is worth rehabilitating? Can you give more concrete examples on that?
Actually, well, when creditors are faced with these kinds of problems, like one of their debtors is planning to undergo rehabilitation, the first thing a creditor would ask is, what's your game plan? How are you going to do this? So, for example, where will you get the additional capital to continue your operations? That's very crucial, and in fact, that's also what the court would look into. Um, are you going to source additional income? Are you going to ask for additional capital contributions from the stockholders, or is there someone who is willing to infuse additional capital, sort of a white knight? And the second also is, can your business still continue? Kasi pag, let's say we're talking of a company that all with assets that are all depreciated, hindi na magagamit yung mga assets. So if that's going to be the case, then a creditor might think, well, I don't think you can continue your business. I mean, what are you going to use to continue your operations when all of your machineries are dilapidated? Whereas if the creditor sees that you still have adequate assets to continue your business, then they would be more inclined to say, okay, I think you have a fair chance of continuing your business and getting rehabilitated. And then of course, the important thing also, the creditors are also interested. Okay, what's your timeline for paying us? 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road, and how much are we going to get? Remember, we also have to ensure that the creditors also receive something. It's not enough that you just pay them. You also have to consider the time value of money, since they're going to be paid in the future. So these are more or less the things that creditors look into to see and determine whether they will support a rehabilitation efforts or not. Siguro other things that they can also look into is who's going to manage. Like if they think that the company is being mismanaged, perhaps if the debtor is willing to get in professionals, independent professionals to run the company, then perhaps the creditor may consider supporting the plan for rehabilitation.
Yeah, attorney.
I just want to add to that. Based on our experience, also, I think what also counts, attorney, is your transparency, no, to the creditor.
Yeah, I agree also.
You're really telling them what's happening. You're not hiding. You don't have two books. You only have one book that you show them. That shows your integrity and your commitment to really go through this rehabilitation process and survive.
Yeah. In fact, if you try to hide the true facts, that's also one of our grounds wherein the creditor can move to dismiss the rehabilitation because there has been fraud. Thank you for pointing that, Vincent. That's a very good point.
Now, imaginary scenario. Halimbawa, I'm into business A. Then I apply for rehab and I say na mag-iiba ako ng negosyo from say from food to say retail. Pwede ba 'yon? Change ng business totally change business.
Well, I think rehabilitation connotes a continuation of your business. So if you're going to say a change in business, that's not going to be very palatable to the creditors. I don't think they would accept it because there's so much uncertainty. If you're going to jump into a different business, I mean, what would be the basis for saying that you'll be able to generate this much cash flow if you change your business? So while our rules allow for a spin-off, but not necessarily a complete change in your business. So the rules.
It's going to be a hard sell.
It's going to be a very hard sell. Yeah, I agree.
So Vincent, no, balikan ko lang ulit yung tanong ko kanina. Baka I may have missed it, no, yung sagot mo, no. But what are the types of businesses na talagang nahirapan ngayon and like wala, benta na lang natin or anong klaseng negosyo to? I know that agriculture and the essentials talagang nag-thrive in this pandemic.
So essentials versus the non-essentials. So in terms of the industries, ang hardly hit talaga yung mga nasa tourism and hospitality. Yun, no? At if you take a look at this tourism and hospitality, no, ang immediate na naiisip natin mga hotels, mga ganyan. Pero there are a lot of suppliers na naapektuhan, supplying tours for the tourists going to these places na dati maraming tao. Mga restaurants also, no, mga businesses where people gather. Yan yung mga naapektuhan. Events organizing, these are also businesses that were hardly hit. And ayun, nandun pa rin kami sa stage on how we would really retrofit these kinds of businesses to be able to cope with the new normal. Kasi apparently what we're seeing in terms of the restaurant business, for example, that you're going to limit the number of people who would be able to dine in your restaurant defeats the purpose of having a physical structure and go to delivery na lang, no? Pero of course, when we take a look at the branding of all of these restaurants, hindi naman lahat ang branding niya ay for delivery purposes. Iba kasi yung need na ina-address nun. So we are still in the process of really discovering and trying out things on how to revive these industries. One of the experiments that I've heard is sa alcohol business, no? Kasi nagkaroon ng what you call this, yung pagbabawal ng liquor ban. And some of them have said that what boosted sales in sa mga restaurants, no, they got in touch with their and they put up they set up simultaneous deliveries, so that what they could have what they call e-Numan sessions. That's e-Numan session. Yeah. So via Zoom also. So mukhang nagiging talagang virtual na yung mundo natin, no? Things that we couldn't really think of before is now happening. Pero on the other side, marami din namang mga opportunities kaming nakikita, particularly in the graphic design, online marketing is also big. We're also seeing an influx of a resurgence of the business processing out BPO sector, kasi tingin namin talaga dadami yung mga kakailanganin in terms of online transactions.
So Vincent, what's your recommendation ba? I mean, yung mga ganitong sectors, do they continue? Do they retool or just look for new opportunities?
Okay. Actually, dito na talaga mapapatunayan yung mga totoong entrepreneurs. Kasi yung totoong entrepreneurs will really push the envelope and will not stop. They will find for solutions. At yung mga tingin natin hobby lang talaga yung businesses nila, I think will resort to closing down their business. And I think there's no shame in closing down a business. It's better to cut your losses and to stop the bleeding rather than quicken your death, no? Pabilisin mo yung pagkamatay mo. So all of these things, I think it will boil down to some level of personal choice from you to be able to decide kung talagang magko-continue ka pa ba or hindi. And a lot of times, based on industries and based on experience, yan yung magde-decide kung kakayanin mo pa ba itong pandemic na to in the coming months.
Now, I want to ask attorney, for those that are opting to declare bankruptcy, what are their options and what are the consequences? Makakautang pa ba sila ulit sa bangko? Yung mga ganong issue.
Okay. Well, I would suggest that before they go into bankruptcy proceedings, try to talk to your creditors. Try to arrive at some form of agreement with them rather than go directly to court. Because like it or not, while bankruptcy proceedings are not supposed to be adversarial, I'm sure the creditors will always, some of the creditors will fight tooth and nail to prevent the court from issuing a stay order. Because once a stay order is issued, that means that none of the creditors can go after the debtor to enforce their claims. And that's really the primary goal of a debtor when he goes for bankruptcy proceedings. But for me, the prudent thing to do would be, it's better to negotiate, come at a win-win solution with your creditors and avoid proceedings, because at this point in time, given the the situation right now, we're also struggling with how we're going to resume court proceedings. Right now, courts are physically closed. We don't know how it's going to be when the enhanced community quarantine will be lifted. And we're still at the stage wherein we're trying to experiment with new technologies in conducting our hearings, like through virtual conferences. So it's not going to be an easy task of simply going to court and trying to get a stay order once you file your case, because right now courts are also struggling. So rather than go through that process wherein you have to you have wherein it's going to be very litigious, I think the better option really is to talk to creditors, find an agreement. I mean, you also have an option for an out of court set rehabilitation plan that's viable under our rules. That's the better option for me. And if there's really if the debtor thinks that he has really no option but to go for a rehab petition, then it should be a last resort.
Now, attorney, I want to ask about non-essential. So, quote unquote, non-essentials. I'm not really comfortable with this term, but I think that's the ano ba? Yan pala yung naiisip natin na term sa mga industries, no, na tinatawag nating non-essentials. What if I'm a business owner I'm a non-essential business owner, and I want to apply for rehab. Now, pina-factor in na ba ng mga creditors ngayon yung market conditions because of the pandemic, or are they looking ahead or projecting? Or kasi I think yan yung I don't know, parang uncertainties na parang magpapautang ba to sa akin, kung itutuloy ko pa ba tong ano, what are the main tips that you can give to businesses?
I think it's really it really boils down on how you're able to present a realistic and viable rehabilitation plan if you're really going for bankruptcy. That means you have to set in what are your you have to set in realistic projections. I don't think I don't think non-essential industries would expect a lot. So maybe they can get experts to help them forecast on what would be the perfect time for them to revitalize or their sales and place that in their projections. They also have to disclose on what they really plan to do given our situation wherein people are really more concerned with getting the essentials rather than non-essentials. So transparency, being able to present a realistic projection, a realistic cash flow, as well as a good game plan. Those are my tips for them to be able to successfully undergo a rehabilitation petition. And again, and if it's possible, perhaps do an out of court rehabilitation agreement with your creditors rather than go through the process of litigating it in court.
Now, we have a question from Girlie Isabel Umali Requizo. For an SME, how do you advise them to proceed? What are the immediate reliefs available to them? This is very generic. So, Vince, yun nga, ano bang immediate reliefs na available for SMEs?
Well, sagutin ko muna how to proceed. I think kailangan nating respetuhin yung what's currently happening, no? The recovery will really be quite slow. Yun yung nakita ko, especially when we go to small, medium, and large corporations. No? Kasi ibang animal talaga yung micro kasi maliliit lang yung amounts involved doon. Yun, you have to take it slow and you have to really strive for survival rather than be realistic, no? Talagang survival yung ating goal ngayon, hindi to thrive and to expand. So kung mag-survive tayo ngayong pandemic na to, that's already a very, very big accomplishment as entrepreneurs for us. So what are the immediate reliefs? Like for us, we were able to get assistance from the BIR and social security system with the small business wage subsidy. And there are, as I mentioned a while ago, there are already programs that are currently being developed with the Development Bank of the Philippines and the Land Bank of the Philippines, sa Board of Investments, sa DTI, na mga 0% interest-free loans. So sino yung ipaprioritize ng mga organizations na to? Ang ipaprioritize nila ay yung mga organizations that have previous experience or their current clients. Kaya napakahalaga talaga that you build relationships with creditors, you build relationships with investors even before you need them. Kasi kapag ngayon mo pa lang yan hahanapin, nasa dulo ka ng linya. And makikita natin, kulang na kulang ang pondo, baka nga hindi pa yan magkasya sa mga current na clients, pero nakapila ka pa, matatagalan bago mapunta sa iyo yung mga mga benefits. For example, even with the small business wage subsidy, we were able to access it because we were compliant with the BIR and the SSS. And when we placed our TIN number and SSS numbers sa site nila, pre-qualified ka agad. So yung application process was smooth, albeit we really had to be patient kasi medyo matagal talaga yung process.
Yeah. Okay, so I think we need to wrap up. So any parting words? Mauna ka, Vincent.
Sige. No, so para sa akin, I think self-care is also very important at this point, especially to our entrepreneurs who are managing micro, small, and medium enterprises. Madalas kasi ang mga entrepreneurs ay iniisip ang kanilang mga employees, ang kanilang mga pinapasweldo, pero baka napapabayaan din natin ang ating sarili. So it's not the end of the world. Pwede naman po tayong mag-file ng bankruptcy at magsimula ulit, no? Hindi pa po natatapos ang mundo. May pag-asa. I think that's my that's my message for this webinar.
Attorney Aldrich.
Yeah. Well, my parting words would be for the enterprises there and for everyone else, let's work together to rebuild and reshape our economy. This is a time wherein we should try to try to help one another. Let's not be too litigious. I mean, the solution is not really to go to court. The solution is to be human beings, to talk, to arrive at a common ground wherein we can arrive at a win-win solution.
Okay, and that ends our webinar. And I'm Rivas. Thanks so much for watching. And I hope we all learned something from this pandemic and we survived this.